So here's the thing. In 1 week, I'm going to be having an early access period for my new course, Advanced Frontends, where you're going to learn how to create highly interactive and modern UIs with the GreenSock animation platform, 3JS, and more. But here's the problem. Some of you might be JavaScript newbies, which is why I uploaded this video. In this 100% free video, I'm going to teach you the necessary JavaScript fundamentals to take part in that course. You're going to build projects throughout this video, which will in turn help you understand what the DOM is and how to write vanilla JavaScript that allows for awesome interactivity. Now, while you can watch the video here on YouTube, you should definitely click on the top link here in the YouTube description to watch it over at DesignCourse.com. Just create a free account, and in that way you're gonna have access to the project files along with other non-video type modules. So remember, if you ever visited the various website award sites like awards.com, the FWA, CSS Design Awards, and thought to yourself, how the heck do these people make these websites? Well, remember, the first step is understanding JavaScript fundamentals, so let's get started. Alrighty, let us get started with the very first project. So here's what it is. If I refresh the browser, you'll see that we have a brief animation where things fade in and come down. And we can also hover over, and you can see there's a little bit of a micro interaction, as it's called. If I zoom up, this give me another tip. You can see that we have an underline, a text decoration of underline being added on hover, and also we're moving over this little arrow as well, an SVG graphic. Then finally, if we click on it, all it does is simply change the text, or it manipulates the DOM, which is called the document object model. We'll get into that specifically here soon. As you can see, it's clearly a very, very simple project, but it is our very first project, and I'm making the assumption that you've never touched JavaScript before. Most courses, their very first project is literally a Hello World console log. So even though this is simple, this is actually a little bit more so than what you would find in terms of complexity on most other courses. Because even just to get to this point, there's a fair bit of concepts to make all of this work, and we're going to tackle it for this specific project. Now in this video, this very first lesson, I want to tackle something that's very important, especially in regards to the type of course this is and our goal. Our goal is to create highly interactive websites or front ends. We're not interested in APIs or anything like that or connecting with databases, but one of the very important topics to understand is, should I use CSS to achieve this, or should I use JavaScript? So when we ask ourselves that question, we always want to try to use CSS as much as possible. If we can achieve it with CSS alone, then use CSS. Don't use JavaScript, all right? And there's a few things here in this particular project where we absolutely do not have to use JavaScript. So if I refresh this, we can see this initial animation coming in. Do we need to use JavaScript to do this? We could, but we don't have to. Also, what about this micro interaction here? If we hover over this and we change the styling, do we need JavaScript for that? No, we absolutely do not. Now, what about when we click on this and we change text up there? Yes, we want to use JavaScript for that. So in this video, we're going to work in the necessary CSS animations. And CSS animations can be broken up into two different methodologies. First would be a actual CSS animation with keyframes, and then also with transitions. So these are the two ways you can animate with CSS. And I'm going to show you both of those. So right now, our default, if you open up the project folder for this lesson and you open up the pre-folder, you'll see that if we refresh it, there's no animation. There's no animation even when I hover over this. We want to get to that point here in this specific video. And then in the next lessons, we're going to start introducing JavaScript concepts. So even though this is a beginner JavaScript course, I definitely want to cover CSS as it pertains to animations, because these two are like hand in hand, all right? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and this is, first I'll just show you the rough HTML structure that we have working with, or that we have here. We have just a div class container that's containing everything, as you can see. Nested inside of that is an H1 element and then the button. Nested inside of the button is give me another tip, which is the text to the left of it. And then we have this SVG graphic, which is the arrow. Now, we have linked up here a style sheet of css/main.css. And if we look up here, we'll see that we have a CSS folder and we'll have our main.sass file. So we're using Sass here for this. And the only reason we're using it is just for the nesting abilities. So we can nest things into each other like I'm using here. So if you click on main.sass, we'll see that we have just a few rule sets. We have an empty container rule set. We have just basic background here, H1 element, before, button, etc., etc. There's no animations or transitions occurring here. So if our goal is to make everything kind of fade in and move down, we're going to apply it on this div class container because we want all the elements to just come in and fade down. All right, so to do that, we're going to first set the opacity to 0. We're going to set the transform property, and transform property will allow you to do a bunch of different things, and sometimes several things simultaneously. You can scale things, like make them shrink them up and make them bigger. You can move things around with the translate property, either on the X or Y axis or both. And also you can rotate things. So we're just going to move things down, which means we're going to use translate Y because we're working on the up and down axis. So that's going to be translate Y, and then we're going to put in -50 pixels. So we're setting the original position up 50 pixels by default. All right. Then we're going to go ahead and specify an animation. Fade in for 1 second. So the animation name, we can name it whatever. I'm using camel case here. And then we're going to give it a duration of 1 second. And we also want to put in forwards. If we don't put in forwards, it'll end up kind of not repeating, but it'll just go back to the original state after the animation is complete. So I would advise removing this and just giving it a shot to see what happens. In fact, we're just going to do that anyhow. We could also add in specific animation properties, shorthand properties, or not shorthand properties, but specific properties for like controlling the delay as well. So we could put 0.5 seconds, and that way when a person refreshes the browser, there's a very slight delay and then things will come in. So now we have to go ahead and define this keyframe animation. And for that keyframe animation, here's how we do that. At keyframes, the name of it is fade in. And then for this one, all we have to say is 2. And then we'll put opacity 1. Because remember, we set it opacity 0 right here. And then we're going to say transform, translate Y back to 0, which is the original point of where this HTML element will be in the document. All right, so we're going to save that. And by the way, make sure you're watching this. I already covered this in the intro videos. You're watching the Sass file to make sure that your changes are being made. So I'm going to go ahead here and watch how it comes in and then it hides. Well, that's why we want to add forwards to the end of that animation property. So forwards, just like that, will come back. And now it will stay there. And that's what we want. So now let's go ahead and focus on this little micro interaction. Give me another tip. We have 2 things happening here. We want the text underline to show up on the hover, and then we want to move over that little arrow. So let's take it first with the text decoration. So when it comes to Sass, we're able to find that element. Let's see where it would be under button. And that button, that type, if we look back here, is right here, span. So button span, there it is. So we want to come inside of this rule set, and we're going to put the ampersand and then a colon, hover. So on hover, we just want to add text decoration, underline. Save it. We'll go back, and there we go. We have our nifty little underline. Very simple. Now this one, it's a little bit more complex. We have to move it over a few pixels based on whenever a person hovers over the entire button. All right, so if we go and find our button, we can come down here. We can say, and hover. So this means whenever the entire button's being hovered over, what is the next selector that we want to change something about? Well, you can see here we have the SVG element. So we want to move that SVG element, or the arrow, over a little bit. So we say SVG. And then we create a rule set for that specifically. And then all we say is transform. Remember, when you want to move something, is it on the y-axis, or are we going to move it on the x-axis? Well, in this case, we want to move it on the x-axis because the arrow is pointing that way. So it would make sense to do that. So we're going to say translate x this time instead of y. And we're just going to move it over very subtly to 10 pixels. So now we're going to go ahead and go back. If I hover over this, look at that. Very nice interaction. So when it comes to creating these highly interactive, amazing, beautifully designed websites, these tiny little micro interactions and paying attention to the small details really goes a long way. All right, so now at this point, we have what we want. We can refresh this, and we have our little micro interaction, but now nothing happens on click, and that's where we're going to focus on the next lesson. All right, so welcome to lesson 2 of our first project. If I refresh, it's not working because I forgot to open with live server. Let's go do that real quickly. There we go. It comes in. We have a little micro interaction down here, but we click it and nothing happens. We want to change this. Okay, so in this video, we're going to take a look at JavaScript, and specifically, we're going to look at variables and the 2 different types of variables, such as let and constant, and also the document object model. So there's a lot to digest here, and even though you're at the very beginnings of understanding JavaScript, understanding this stuff is extremely important. It's the foundation that you're going to be building upon. So pay attention, try to understand as much as possible. I'll do my best job to try to convey this information as much as possible. So I want you to follow along with me. I want you to open the live server extension like I discussed in the intro chapter about how to do all this stuff. And I want you to hit F12. This works with Firefox or Chrome. And when you do this, just ignore this little warning if you see that. We're going to come up here and we want to click on console right here. Now, sometimes depending on your browser settings, this might be opened up in a different area of your browser. It might be at the bottom. If you click on this little 3 dots, you'll see it gives you the option of where to place this. I have mine on the right side. So this is real important. If I click on elements up here, the elements tab, we'll see this representation of our HTML. Now, you may or may not know about this already, but in case you don't, I just wanted to be certain that you understand what's happening here. If we open up these elements, you can see it's highlighting based on where we're clicking on. Our goal is to change this text right here. It is absolutely necessary to keep improving. We can actually change it right here by double-clicking into it. And I'll say, hi, what is up? It actually changes that for us. But when we make the changes in the browser, in the inspector, as this is called, and we refresh, it doesn't persist. It just stays there. It's only for the purpose of debugging things, for essentially. If we want this to persist and we want this to be able if we really want to truly be able to change this with JavaScript, then we need to obviously use JavaScript. And so I want you to think of this area as your kind of like your document object model, or your DOM. You'll hear this often, the DOM. It's an acronym that stands for Document Object Model. And we use JavaScript to interact with that in order to do things with it, like, for instance, change the inner text between these H1 elements. So I want to show you exactly how to do that. All right. So first, where do we write our JavaScript? Well, we have basically 2 different options. Especially when we're talking about a vanilla JavaScript project or just a pure JavaScript. We're not using libraries like React or Angular or Vue or Svelte. We can do it either in a separate file, which makes sense in pretty much all real projects, or you could do it inline here within a script tag. So you just type in script, and by the way, this is called Emmet abbreviations. You don't I could sit here and type all this HTML here by hand, like this little lesson sign script, and then do all that. It'll autofill some of it, but if I know the tag name right off the bat, just type it, script, enter, and it's going to place the cursor where we want it to, and it'll also just negate us having to type a bunch of stuff. I have a very brief abbreviations course on my YouTube channel at DesignCourse, so you can just do a channel search and you can find that, because it allows you to do a bunch of other really cool stuff. All right, so we can write all of our JavaScript right here just before the closing body tag right there. All right, so what if we wanted to use JavaScript to change this type immediately on page load? All right, so right now it says it's absolutely necessary to keep improving. Well, I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm just going to say hi. All right, so right now it just says hi. It looks ridiculous, right? So we're just going to leave that there temporarily. Now, if we want to change that JavaScript, we have to introduce a few concepts, especially if you're brand spanking new to JavaScript. Okay, so the first is what's called document. If I do what's also called a console.log, the log method, you're going to see methods all over the place. You'll see a little period and then a name. That right there is a method, okay? And then we're going to open this up in parentheses in order for it to accept an argument. And in our case, we want to pass in, and by the way, we could just say, I might as well just do hello world. This is one of the things that all JavaScript courses have. If I hit F12 to get out the inspector, and we go to console, you'll see it right there, hello world. Okay, now we don't want to console log that. We want to console log something called document. All right, we're going to save this, go back, and you'll see it has this little right arrow. We can click this, and it's basically a representation of our entire HTML. Isn't that interesting? All right, ignore this script part, but we have our H1. All right, we can see it says hi. How do we change this though? The H1 element, we need to get access to that specifically. So to do that, let's go ahead, and you can make a comment, by the way, with just 2 forward slashes. Notice in Visual Studio Code, it will just gray it out. That means this code's not gonna run, but it's there for us just to make comments or comment out code. And that's very handy for debugging, and it's also very handy for just documenting what certain things of your JavaScript does. So what we want to do is say document.querySelector. Now what is that? What is this dot thing and then a name after it? That's a method, okay? QuerySelector is something that you find yourself using a lot for interactive front ends, okay? Or creating interactive websites, essentially. QuerySelector basically takes a parameter, and that parameter is going to be an HTML element, all right? Or sometimes you refer to as an HTML tag. Div is a tag, H1 is a tag, button is a tag, span, SVG, there are many of them. We have a few of them here. We want to specify H1 because that's something that we want to change. We want to change the inner text, this hi, to something else. So to do that, we just pass in with quotes or just single quotes, H1. All right. Now, if you uncomment the line above it and we just paste that in and we save this, you're going to see in our code inspector we have H1 and has all these properties about it. Look at all these different things here that it's providing us information about. Well, if we look here specifically, right there at inner text, it says hi. Well, we can tie into that. And what we can say, and let's go ahead and comment this out, is dot inner text equals, and then we put in quotes. And then for us, we're going to give it the original. It is absolutely necessary to keep improving. Now, by the way you end a line, you can either use a semicolon in JavaScript, or you can just choose not to include it. All right, that's a very important concept. I'm just going to choose not to write it with a semicolon. So if I save it, I come back, notice there it is. Even though in our HTML it says hi, our JavaScript has now overwritten that because we're manually setting, or we're changing the DOM to it is absolutely necessary to keep improving. And that's why it shows up and you don't even see hi. The hi might be there for an extremely split second in the context of this project because the JavaScript will render thereafter. But we don't see it because we're setting this to opacity 0. So that's why by default we just don't see it. Okay. Now this is one way of changing the DOM, so to speak. But typically you want to use variables. JavaScript variables are one of the most simple foundational concepts to understand. And remember, I talked about the JavaScript variables of types being let versus constants. I'm not sure if I talked about that yet, but I'm going to talk about it now. We're going to refactor this, and refactor means just to change the code. All right, I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. Now down here, we're going to define our very first JavaScript variable, which is exciting stuff to me. So our very first JavaScript variable, the way you define a JavaScript variable, modern JavaScript is going to be one of two ways. You're going to use a let variable or you're going to use a constant variable. Sounds strange, sounds maybe complex. It's not, it's so simple. All right, you use let when you know that this variable might change in the future. The assignment might change in the future in your JavaScript. Otherwise, use constant when you know that it's never going to change. You don't want it to change. You're not going to be changing the value. You're not going to be reassigning it. That's it. That's all it means. And why do you want to use constant in that case? Because it just helps for code readability. When you see a const variable, you know, okay, this cannot change. And if you try to change it, it will error, and we'll see how that works. So we're going to use a const, and we just type in const. That's all it is. const, and then the name. All right, the name of the variable. So const. All right, well, we're just going to say quote because it says give me a new quote. That's what we're going to use. And we say equal, and then this is where we specify this type right here. All right, very simple. Now at this point, if we save it, nothing's going to happen in the browser. It's just going to go back to hi because we commented out this line. It doesn't run anymore, even though we see it. And there's still no interactivity. So really, we've just created a variable, but it just exists in memory. We're not doing anything to make it show up. All right. Now we can also create a variable. And by the way, we can console log quote just like that. We can save this. We can come back, and we can now see it is right there in our console. So now what we want to do is we want to assign this variable here to this section. So what we can do, we'll delete that. We can just say equals quote. All right, so let's save that, and guess what? It's going to work exactly the same way as before, except this time we're taking this string and we're assigning it to this quote variable, and then we're taking quote and we're passing it into here. It's the same thing, except we've just used 2 lines now instead of 1. Now we can even take this a step further, but before I do that, I want to introduce something that's very important. Like I said, the difference between let and const. This is a constant right here. Quote is a constant variable. So if I try to reassign it to quote equals hello world, we're going to save it. Uh-oh, look what we have. Uncaught type error, assignment to constant variable. We're trying to reassign a constant variable. That will not work, all right? So if we wanted to do that, we change it to a let. So we can save it there. Guess what? It showed up. There's no more errors. It says hello world. Very important concepts. I know this is very simple, but I want to make sure you absolutely understand this concept because this can really start to trip you up when the projects become more complex. All right, so let's go back to const and let's delete that. And we could take this a step further. All right, so if I also take both of these lines of type and I hit Control /, it will comment both of those out. Now, you can also comment in another way. If I add a / and a asterisk and then end it here with an asterisk, that's a quick way of commenting out multiple lines without having to add double / in front of them. Very important to understand that as well. So let's just go ahead and take this. We're going to start from here again. And this time, we're also going to create a constant that references this element right here, our h1 element. All right, so I'm going to copy that. All right, so const title equals, and again, we'll take this here, make sure we have that copied, paste it in. And now all we have to do is say title.innerText equals quote. All right, so we've defined our properties up here, our variables, and then we do something with them right here. And notice how this is much more simplistic looking than something like this, which is very long. And this is typically how you're going to do things in the future. Even though this is just one line, this is a lot more readable, especially when you start having a bunch of properties and variables. It just works better this way. So if we save, we go back, we'll see that even though it says hi right here, it is still working just as it did in this first top line, except we're just making the code a little bit more readable. All right, so in the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and now focus on how we can actually tie in and add what's called an event listener on this give me another tip button so that we can then change it only once this is clicked here. All right, welcome to lesson 3 of our first project. And what I have here is a web result. I went to Google and I typed in add event listeners list, and I found this reference right here. And we're going to be attaching an event listener to that little button element. And when it's clicked, then we're going to make it execute some sort of code that will change that quote, which we've already done. And there are many different types of event listeners. There is the one that we want, which is click. So an element is clicked on. Well, there are many others as well. You can see blur, can play. The ones that you end up using the most are mouse events, like hovering over things, like mouse over. You can see key press. There are so many, like mouse out. So when the mouse leaves an element, then we can make something happen through JavaScript. When the mouse enters, when the mouse clicks down, there are so many. There's a mouse wheel. We can use the wheel event that is deprecated, which means it's no longer supported. Just use a wheel event if you want something to happen when somebody uses their mouse wheel. There are so many here to use. You don't have to memorize all of them. In fact, you don't use most of them in most projects. You only use a tiny amount. Click is one that's used probably the most out of them all. There's also the mouse over, mouse out, etc., etc. I just wanted you to be aware of that. So let's go ahead and write our own. Okay, so looking at our HTML, by the way, I want to make sure I am live here with live server. And I also want to make sure in my CSS that I'm watching the Sass, although we won't be changing any of the CSS anyhow. And here we go. Okay, so what we want to happen, just to refresh this, when this button element is clicked, we want code to initiate that will change this to whatever we want. All right, so if we go back to our HTML, we look at the HTML structure, we can see we have the button. The button is the element in the DOM that we want to attach an event listener to. So we already know how to gain access to these DOM elements. All right, so it should just be a simple matter of creating a variable that references our button element, and then we're going to use a new method to attach to it called add event listener of a type of click. Here's how we do it. Well, we're going to, let me just zoom up here. Right here, we're going to specify we already have our quote. We already have the title. And we want to take this out. Let's remove this one. What we're going to specify is we're going to have a button. Oh, we first have to actually get the button. So let's do const button equals document.query selector button. All right, very simple. So now we have 3 different constant variables. Now what we're going to say is button.add event listener. Now, by the way, when you're typing some of these methods out, you'll see this little thing right here. You can just hit enter and that will automatically fill it for you, so you don't have to keep typing. Now, the first parameter is the type. Remember those types that we saw, like mouse out, mouse over, scroll, wheel, etc., etc.? This is where we wrap it inside of, I use single quotes. You could use double quotes if you want. And I'm going to put in click. That's the type of event listener. Then the next parameter is the function or the code that you write this in. So for us, we're going to use what's called an arrow function. So we put equal and then greater than, and then before we do that, we put parentheses. So it kind of looks a little strange right here. This is for passing in other data. We don't need it. So we just put this plus this, and then we put the squiggly little braces here and hit enter. That's typically what this looks like. It looks very strange and confusing. Don't worry about that. Then right down here we have the closing, the two closing tags right here. So inside of here, this is where we're going to execute the code. So what this means, logically speaking, when this button is clicked, execute this code inside here. Well, we already have the code because we've done it over here already. We have our quote, we have our title. So what we want to do is simply say title.innerText, remember we used that method already, equals quote. Now let's save this. It says, hi, give me another tip. There we go. It is absolutely necessary to keep improving. Now let's go ahead and change this real quick. I'm going to go back up here, change hi to that, and then I'm going to paste in a new quote off screen to right here. Let's save it again. All right, let's refresh. We'll see the animation come in. We have a micro interaction. We click it, and there you go. Because if you do not, you will remain stagnant. So that right there, in a nutshell, is a very simple example of a lot of what you end up doing when you're making these interactive sites. All right, so now let's go ahead and take this a little bit further here, and I want to demonstrate another concept that will be really important for us to understand. All right, so remember how we have const title right here. Remember, constants variables cannot be reassigned. So if we want to change quote here inside of this function, we can say quote equals some other text. And of course, if we save this, we click it, we get that error again, assignment to constant variable. So I can't drive this point home enough. It's very important to understand if you want to do something like that, we say let, not a constant. So now we save it and it works. Another final thing I wanted to introduce, and this is also extremely important, is the concept of taking this code here and putting it into its own function. So we haven't talked about functions yet, but this is something that you'll end up using because it allows you to reuse your code so that you're not verbose or in other words, repeating lines of code all the time. So this is an extremely simple example of this, but we're gonna make a function out of this right here. So we're gonna take this code, we're going to delete it, and we're gonna say function change quote, and notice this is called camel case. The first letter of the function name is lowercase, and then any other words thereafter, the first letter will be capitalized. So in change quote, after creating a function out of that, we wrap it, put it in parentheses at the end. It's a little strange because they're empty and there's nothing in it, and that's because in the future we can pass in parameters and arguments in there. but we don't need that right now. And so then we put in our squiggly braces, and then we put in the code inside of that. Then right here, we can take this and refactor it. So let's go ahead and, well, yeah, let's just go ahead and change this up. All we have to do is pass in the name of the function, change quote. And this time we don't put parentheses after it. All right, very important to understand that. And now if we save it, guess what? It is going to work. All right, works just the same. All right. So hopefully you're starting to understand how this works at this point. That very first project, even though it was extremely simple, is now complete. And of course, we can make this way more complex, and we are going to work our way up and up while learning new JavaScript concepts, while also making more interesting projects going forward. Okay, here is our second project, and it is a dark/light mode toggle. So if I come over here and I click on this, we're going to see it changes the background to white and the text to dark or black. And then if we click it again, it reverts back. And you can see there's a slight transition. It's not an immediate one. We'll handle that with CSS. And we could also see that this little handle, this little circle here, moves over. It transforms on the x-axis. So in order to get to this point, we have to introduce several new JavaScript concepts. Now, before we get into that, I do want to mention that you can actually do this sort of thing without JavaScript and with the use of checkboxes, but you could also do it with JavaScript as well. And I really wanted to use this very simple project as a means to describe some very important JavaScript concepts. Okay, so make sure you open up the appropriate folder for the toggle button here on lesson 1 in the before or the pre folder. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the HTML. So for our HTML, it's pretty straightforward. We have a div class container just wrapping around everything. We have a label of dark. We also have a label of light, and then in the middle we have a div class of switch with a class of handle, which is the circular element. So very simple, straightforward HTML. In terms of our CSS, very simple. We are utilizing CSS variables or CSS custom properties right here. We can see we only have 2. So background color is by default. So by default, we're starting this app off with a dark mode. All right, so we're setting it to this nearly black color, and then we're setting the text color to white. So then in the body, we're specifying that background color and the text color. And we're also, as you can see, transitioning the background color so that once the background color changes, it'll give it a animation from that dark black, almost black color to the white color. You could make that immediate. You don't have to put a transition there, but it's just something we're choosing to do. We also have our container, just making it a flex so that we have our 3 columns. We have the label, we have the toggle switch in the middle, and then we have the other label. And then we're just styling up the switch itself, nothing fancy happening here. There is something down here which is currently not being used in the project, and that is a rule set called move right. And you can see it's a transform translate x 45 pixels. And we're going to be utilizing, and we haven't done this yet, it's a new concept. We're going to be utilizing JavaScript to attach this class, the CSS class, onto that little handle element once it's clicked. And that will initiate this code right here, this CSS property, to move it over. All right, so that when it comes to these interactive websites and these highly interactive front ends, a very common pattern that you will see is we use JavaScript to attach a CSS class to a given element or multiple elements depending on the use case. All right, so now what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and get started with our JavaScript here at the bottom just before the closing body tag. And we are going to create a few different variables. One is going to be a constant. Another is going to be a constant, and then we're also going to introduce a let variable, but it's also going to be a Boolean value. And we'll get to that in a second. But for now, let's go ahead and define these variables. So first, ask yourself, what is it that needs to happen in terms of JavaScript interactivity? And from there, what are the variables that need to be defined? Well, if we go back to our project, it's this click. Everything is predicated on getting this click to do something. So in order to do that, what are we clicking on? Well, I can show you in our dev inspector. We just click this little blue icon right up there, and then allow us to select this entire element. And it shows us it's the div class of switch. And it also has an ID of switch. All right, so at this point in time, this is actually not the live project we're working on. I have the finished project on the actual different monitor. If you look at yours, it doesn't function yet. And also, if I get out F12 and we grab this same thing, we'll see that our div class switch doesn't yet have an ID. The handle doesn't have an ID. The reason we want an ID is because of this. I'm going to show you. Up until this point, we've been using query selector in order to access certain DOM elements. So we can say const switch. By the way, if you hit switch, if you just use the name switch, you'll see like this red underline. The reason it is because if you hover over it, switch is not allowed as a variable declaration name. So in JavaScript, there are certain names that you cannot use. So we can just use switch camel case btn. All right. So if we tried to do document.querySelector and just select the div element for our switch, and notice there's multiple div elements. There's one here, here, here. There's 3 of them. And I just put div here. This will not work. So query selector is just only for selecting a single element typically. If you wanted to select multiple elements, we would use query selector all in a form of an array, but we're going to get to that later on. If we just want to be able to choose one of these elements, one of the div elements, we can do it by adding an ID attribute, and we'll give it the name of switch. So ID equals switch. Go ahead and add that. And the way we do this is we say document dot, and the method that we're going to use this time is not query selector, is going to be get element by ID. And that ID name we've specified up there, switch. All right, there we go. Now we're going to replicate that line. Shift Alt and the down arrow key will allow you to replicate that current line. And we're going to create another one. We also have to get the handle because we want to attach this CSS class move right to that handle. So to do that, we're going to give this a unique name. We'll call it handle. Get element by ID handle. And we of course have to add the ID here, handle. And it's okay if the class and the ID are the same name. Okay, now that we have that, we're going to define a third variable, and we need a way to know which state the app is currently in. Is it currently in dark mode or is it currently in light mode? Well, we're going to do that by storing a variable, and we can do this in multiple ways, and we will. But the first way we're going to do it is just we're going to set the actual variable to either a 0 or a 1. So we're going to say let switch status equals 0. We're going to add a comment here. 0 is dark, 1 is light. All right. Now you're going to find we'll be able to do this same concept, except we'll use a Boolean value, which means true or false. And we're going to do that there at the end. Now finally, now that we have all of the necessary variables created, what needs to happen next? Well, the click. We have access to the button, which is the switch right here. That's this code. We can say switch btn.add event listener. It's a click. And then we can go ahead and pass in a function. We'll just call this toggle mode. And again, you could write it like this and just put the code in here, or just go back to what we were doing like this, and then say function toggle mode and open it up like that. All right. So at this point, We can console log just to make sure it works. We can come back to our project. We'll click it, go back to console, and it says hello. And it will keep on saying hello no matter how many times you click it. All right, so at this point is going to be a good part to stop this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and introduce another very crucial concept in JavaScript, and that is our if statements. All right, here's our project. We click it, nothing happens yet, and that is okay. Let's go ahead and now introduce a brand new concept, and that is an if statement, if else. Now, what we can do is we can write an if statement like this. What we want to check is the switch status state. Is it 0 or is it 1? That's going to help us determine which classes we need to be adding or removing, and it also helps us determine when we try to overwrite these variables right here, what colors they should be set at. All right, so here's how we do that. We simply say if, we wrap it in parentheses, and what is it that we want to compare? Well, we want to compare the switch status. If switch status, and this is called a comparison operator, equals, equals, equals. I'm going to say right here, in this case, 1. And then we're going to open this up in the squiggly braces right here. So let me show you real quickly. This is JavaScript comparison operators. There's a bunch of them. As we can see, we have equal to, just for double equal signs. We have the one that we just used, equal value and equal type. Putting exclamation point equal is not equal, and then the same kind of parallel here to not equal to value or not equal to type. We have greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than and equal to, or a ternary operator, which actually is kind of like a very quick way of writing an if-else statement, and we'll get to that as well in the future. But just understand that even though these are confusing right now, we're going to be working with these more so going forward in the context of our different projects. All right, so we're basically saying if switch status is absolutely equal to the value of 1, then do something inside of here. All right, so if that's the case, remember 1 is light, then we want to go ahead and I guess we want to do two different things really. We want to update the value of these CSS properties, which we can do through JavaScript. And we also want to move that little circular element over to the right. And we're going to do that by attaching this class right here. Okay, so the first thing that we'll do is let's set those properties in CSS right here. So you're probably wondering, how do we access these CSS property values or the CSS properties and be able to update their values through JavaScript? All right, so for this, we're just going to have to memorize a little bit of code for this sort of thing. So first we specify document, just like we did previously. And then we're going to say document element dot style. This gives us access to all the styles, so you could console log this alone right now just to see what comes back. And then we're going to say set property, and then the first parameter accepts the actual name of the CSS property that we defined. So we have the background color, and let me hit Control B to get rid of the sidebar for a second. And the second parameter accepts the new value that we want to set it to. So the background color, we're going to make that white. Now we're going to Shift Alt and down because we want this to overwrite two different properties. And for this one, it's going to be text color. This text color will be black. White on black, we're going to have maximum contrast. All right, so let's go ahead and save this as is and see what happens. So we'll go back, we'll click it. Uh-oh, it is not working. So let's figure out why that's not working. Well, if you think about it, let switch status equals 0 Well, this isn't running. This code is not initiating because we wrapped it in an if statement that says if is equal to 1. All right, so if I remove this, the if statement, and save it, we could see it now works, but it doesn't toggle back because we're not doing an if-else statement. All right, so maybe what we can do instead is change this to 0. All right, we'll come back. There we go. But if we click it again, it's not going to revert back. We don't yet have an else statement. So at the very end, we put else. So we're going to switch the switch status on this else statement here because we're changing the state of it to a light mode. So down here at the bottom, we can say switch status equals 1. And then we'll copy this. Else switch status equals 0. Then we'll take these two right here, we'll paste them, and we just want to revert back to the original values right here. So this is going to be hashtag 232323 for the background color, and then the text color is white. Now if we save this, it's now going to toggle. Very, very simple. Now, of course, our little button is not, our handle is not moving over to the right and not moving back and forth. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and discuss exactly how to achieve that. All right, so let's go ahead and get that little handle moving over. There's one more line of code that we have to add in this first if statement and also the else statement. And so what we want to do is we want to attach this move right class to this element right here. Let me zoom up. This element right here to the handle. All right. So how would we do that? Well, we currently have a constant called handle, and we're getting that by its ID. And the way we do this with JavaScript is we're going to say handle dot class list dot add. All right. So we're essentially adding a class, and that class name is move-right. Now notice we don't put the little period like we do in CSS to define the rule set. We just do the class name only. Again, this will have the little dot for class, but we don't include that for class list.add. Then what we do is class list over here, we can say simply remove. And because we have, if you come up here, on the handle rule set transition transform, it's going to make that a smooth transition whenever this move right class gets added to the DOM and whenever it gets removed. So it'll have a nice animation between those two states. So let me make sure I am actually watching this project, which I wasn't. There we go. We click it, look at that. Now, if we didn't have that CSS transition property, if I remove that, watch what will happen instead. Oh, the reason that didn't work, this is a common issue, because we're using Sass here. We want to make sure we're watching that file. There we go. And of course, you'll need the live Sass compiler and extensions to do that. But notice how it's instant. And that's because we're utilizing transition. So now we can see that it's nice and smooth. Now I wanted to show you one final thing, another very important JavaScript concept here, and that is Boolean values. All right, so a Boolean value is either true or false. It's just to represent two different states. So what we can do is we can comment that out. We're going to redefine it as let switch status equals false. All right, so now it is a false, either a Boolean value. It's either going to be true or false. And the way we can refactor this is we can say if it's this right here is currently saying if this is 0. Or in other words, we can say if exclamation point switch status. That means if it's false. That's a quick way of writing it. It's the same thing as just doing if switch status equals false. This is a faster way of doing that. Now, if you were to remove that, it simply means if it's true. So this exclamation point will help you determine when you have Boolean values if it's true or false. Very simple. All right, so then we have to update this. So this is 1 and 1 was light. We want to switch it to light mode, we say true. Then over here, we can say false. Now just to keep things a little bit more readable and consistent, because it's the last line of this if statement above it, we'll put it the last line here as well. Switch status is false. So that's how it creates this true or false action, this toggle essentially. So now what we can do is just hit save, now that it's been refactored. Click on it, and it works just the same. So one way isn't necessarily superior to the other, but just know that you have options. All right. Awesome stuff. This particular project is now done, and we've got a lot more to learn. So let's keep on going on. So we got a lot more to learn, so let's keep on going. All right, let's take a look at what we're going to build in this lesson. And it's actually pretty simple. We're only going to introduce one new concept, but we're going to reuse some of the other concepts just so we can really hammer home the ideas that you're learning in terms of JavaScript. So if I refresh this, you're going to see this loading animation, and then the page is going to push up, and it's going to reveal whatever's behind it. And in a real world context, it would just be typically a full website user interface. And this splash screen right here, sometimes called like a preloader screen, it's there for the purpose of preloading assets. You might see something like this on big sites like awards.com, where you have, projects that have a lot of media that needs to be preloaded. And so we're going to be kind of faking this through what's called JavaScript set timeout, that little delay before it pushes up. And we're going to reuse a lot of the other concepts in terms of, for instance, making this move up and then also fading this in right here with JavaScript essentially. So let's go over here and take a look at the actual project. This is what I have so far. Let me scale things up here. And we can see what's happening here. We actually don't need this right there, that font stuff. All we have, if we look up here a little bit close, we have a div class of splash. That's the purple background. And then inside of it, we have this loader right here, which is pointing to loader.svg. Now, loader.svg I actually got from this resource right here. This is a really cool website. It's just called samherbert.net/svg-loaders right up here. And if I go back, let's see, you can basically click download, and you can download a folder from GitHub and access all of these. So they're just nice animated SVG based loaders. We're using this one right here, as you can see. So what we want to do is we can see also we have the section element, and this is typically where you'd have your website UI. So this div splash element is position absolute, and it's just position on top of the website background. And then we just move it up out of the way with transform translate y negative 100%. So just to take a look at the CSS, we have just a few things happening here. We have the body, we have the splash. Again, position is absolute, top and left is 0, width is 100%, height is 100 viewport heights. We have a display grid, place content center, that puts that little icon, the SVG icon in the middle. And then we put the background color right there. And then the image or the SVG width is just at 90 pixels. And yeah, everything else here is pretty self-explanatory. So let's go ahead and hop in and get writing with the JavaScript right here. So think about things sequentially. The first thing that we want to happen is we want to have that screen showing the loading graphic. All right, so if we go back, this is what we currently have. Nothing happens. It's just going to keep on looping this animation because we have no JavaScript to tell it to do anything otherwise. So typically, and we're going to do this in the full course for the Advanced Frontends JavaScript course, you would have like an image or an asset loading library, a JavaScript library, and we're going to be doing that, but not for this. We're just going to kind of like hack it in such a way where instead of waiting for it to load assets, we're just going to use, like I said at the beginning of this video, set timeout. And that is basically a function that allows us to make things happen based on a predefined delay. All right, so we can just delay things inside of a function essentially. So here's how we're going to first do this. The first thing that we need access to is going to be this element right here, the splash element. Why? Because we want to be able to target that to add a class to it that will push it up and out of the way. So we're going to use const, and we're going to say splash equals document.query selector. And we're just going to specify splash right there. Next up, we also, when we're defining all of our variables, I want to define them pretty much all in one location at the top here. So we also have to get access to our h1 element because we want this element to fade in and fade down, which means we also want to attach a class to it through JavaScript. So all I have to do is just Shift-Alt down to replicate that. And then this time we're going to change this query selector parameter to simply h1. And we'll just call this headline. All right, and that should be pretty good right there. All right, so let's use set timeout for this first time. So to use set timeout here, we're just going to say set timeout, camel case there, and we are going to open it up in parentheses, and then here in the first argument, we're going to put another parentheses, but it's going to be empty, and we're going to use an arrow function to open it up here. Now, it takes a second parameter over here where we put it in a comma, and this is the time in terms of sorry, milliseconds. So how long before all of this code that happens in here will execute essentially? You know, how long should it wait essentially? It's kind of like a delay. So if I put in 2000 milliseconds, or in other words, 2 seconds, then if I do a console log in here, we'll just say hi. I save this and go back, and let's hit F12. You'll see it says hi right here, but I didn't give myself enough time. So if I just hit F12 again, there we go. Sorry, it was not showing up here initially. If I just refresh this over here, you'll see 1, 2, and there it shows up. 1, 2, and it shows up. Okay, so that's the idea behind set timeout. Very handy. You'll see it has many different use cases. So what we can do is we can then go ahead and say something like this. Splash dot, here let me zoom up, class list dot add. And again, we've done this already. Let's add a class, a CSS class called remove-splash. All right, now what'll happen is if we come back here and we look in the elements section, and then we look right here where it says remove splash. So if I refresh this, you're going to see it gets added to this splash class that we specified. Now, of course, remove splash doesn't yet exist in our CSS. So we want to add that. We'll add it right here. And so what that's going to look like is very simple. We're just going to say remove-splash transform translate y -100%. Now let's go ahead and save this and see what happens. Refresh 1, 2, and it's hidden immediately. We want that to transition out or animate out. And the way we do this is on the splash element itself. We can just say transition, transform, 1 second, and then we can use an easing function, cubic Bezier. So I think I'll use this second one down here. Now we save that, we go back, refresh, and there we go. Fades out. All right, awesome. The next step is to get this to fade in and down. So what that means is we need to take our H1 element. We're going to make the opacity 0 by default. All right, so we're not going to see it anymore just yet. Then inside of here, we're going to go ahead and basically replicate this line. And we're going to say headline.classlist.add. And we'll say headline-intro. Now that class doesn't yet exist either. So let's just copy this one here. We'll say this is called headline intro. And for headline intro, we're just going to say transform translate y is going to be 0. So we're going to set it at its original position and then opacity 1. Oops, there we go. And then so down here, we also want to take the H1 element and we want to say transform translate y, maybe negative 30 pixels. That way, its starting position is up higher by 30 pixels. And then that way, when we add this class, transform translate y0, we'll push it back down to 0. Finally, we also want to transition it so that it's not an immediate jump, and so that we can see same exact concept as we did with the splash moving up situation. So then we're just going to put in transition, and we want to transition 2 different properties. You could say all, or we could just say transform for 1 second, and then opacity we could do 1 second as well. And let's go ahead. We're going to add something to this, but let's go ahead and see what happens when we refresh. 2 seconds moves up. Oh, and it pretty much happens instantaneously. If you want to have a delay slightly, we can do transition dash delay of like 0.3 seconds. And so now that particular transition will take a little bit longer for it to occur, just barely noticeable. And that is basically it. Now we could refactor this just slightly. You should get in the habit of using functions when possible. So this stuff right here can be added into a function. And so we'll just call this remove splash. And I copied that, by the way. And then we'll say function remove splash. And then we'll just paste that in here. And then another thing we could do is a lot of times you'll see, especially when you're dealing with larger projects, we'll create a configuration variable called duration equals, let's say, 2000. The same value here, and then that way we can just put duration right there. And there we go. So now let's go ahead and take this, refresh. And there we go. Very nice, very simple, smooth transition. So now in the next lesson, we're going to go ahead and put to the test more of the same information that you've been learning so far. So that is, interacting with the DOM at a very limited basis, working with variables, and also working with set timeout, and also working with the animation and attaching classes as well. Okay, welcome to the very first challenge that is a part of the JavaScript course. Now right here I have a Figma prototype, and this is going to be linked here on this page. So look above or beneath the video and you'll be able to take this project and duplicate it and open it up in Figma yourself, and then click play. When I say click play right up here, and you will see this right here. And this is what you're tasked with creating. You're going to be responsible for creating the HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript should you choose to participate in this. And honestly, if your goal is to learn, you should participate in this. So basically what we have here, the starting point should look like this. It has this little quote and then a little button right here. And when you hover over the button, I want you to utilize CSS to make this hover state as well. This is an SVG graphic, and you could just export that within Figma. And by the way, there's going to be a follow-up video to show you exactly how I create this project, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you get stuck, don't worry about that. In fact, I kind of expect it if you're brand new. I don't expect you to be able to pull this off. I do expect you to have a pretty good idea of how to create this in HTML, CSS, since that's kind of a prerequisite for this course. But if you can't get other stuff figured out, or maybe some of the CSS, that's not a big deal. So when you click on Discover What's Extra, this is what happens. All right, we can see we have this animation where the button slides off to the right and it kind of just disappears out of nowhere. And then on the inverse of that, from the left, comes this little unordered list right here. And this little button says plus a little bit of insanity. I just decided to make that a button so we could toggle back and forth. And this is the project. So it's going to utilize JavaScript in order to attach classes that will push things in and out, so to speak. And so if I show you over here, if I go back to the main Figma area, it gives you some details. Click play to play this prototype, create the HTML, CSS, and integrate the necessary JavaScript so that you create the layout and interactions as seen here. Here's the two screens. To take this right here, this button, you hold Control, hold Shift and Control, and you select both, right click, copy and paste as SVG. Then you can just paste that right into your HTML document to make that work. And then over here we have the design for what happens when you click on it. And there's something very important that maybe you don't know this technique, but in order to make things kind of just appear out of nowhere, we use a mask. And I used a mask here in Figma, but when it comes to HTML and CSS creating masks, it's obviously different. And so I kind of show you the basic markup for this idea. What you want to do is for both the image, or the button rather, that's going to have its own mask. You can kind of visualize it right here. Imagine this is like HTML element that says div class mask. And then where it says div class content right here, this would be like your button content. That could be like an ahref tag. And that would be contained inside of this HTML structure right here. Then in your CSS, you take this mask that's wrapped around it. It's the parent element of whatever content you want to show and hide. And you simply say overflow hidden. And that way, if you take content, for instance, this content class, and you create a rule set in CSS for it, and you say transition, translate X 100% or translate Y 100% or even 50%, it'll be cut off. It'll act as a mask. And that's how we're achieving this, and that's how we want to do it in HTML and CSS. And you'll find that that sort of thing is used everywhere when it comes to highly interactive websites. So what I want you to do is go ahead and try to tackle this. Tackle the HTML, create a game plan for kind of how you're going to create this 2-column layout with this little border in the middle. Trust me, there's many ways to do it. And then finally, after you get it all styled exactly as it should look like, make it interactive with JavaScript using everything you've learned so far. All right, and then after that, we can kind of compare notes. If you get stuck, not a big deal. Just look at my video after this, where I walk you through this project on how to start it and finish it. All right, welcome to this brand new project, and hopefully what you were able to come up with is something that worked well for you. But if it didn't, I'm expecting it, especially if you're brand new to this. I'm expecting you to have frustrations and hiccups along the way, to completely normal. You're gonna learn by both trying and failing, and then seeing what I do and what others do, and then you're gonna become better for it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to head on over to our Figma prototype, and we have to have a game plan in terms of our HTML structure. That's the first thing you have to really think about. What HTML elements are we going to use to create this layout? And again, there's a lot of considerations here. So the first thing I typically do is I wrap everything inside of like a parent element. I usually call it div class of container, and it'll just wrap around pretty much everything. We can see we also have a 2-column layout. We have a column here and we have a column here. And by the way, in a real world scenario, you would probably have mobile variations of this. We're not making it mobile friendly because this isn't really a mobile design course. This is just, mainly just for JavaScript. So we're just only dealing with desktop only. So having said that, we have a 2-column layout that's meant to work with desktop. And we can get started there. I mean, as long as we don't have to have a full game plan before we start, but we just have to have a rough high level idea of like what the initial HTML is going to look like. So parent container, 2 elements inside of it for your left and right column. Let's go ahead and get started with that one. All right, so let's go ahead and put our div class of container. So just put period, that means a class, hit enter, and that gives us a div class of container. That's an Emmet abbreviation, E-M-M-E-T. If you want to look at my YouTube channel and type Emmet crash course, you can see all the fast ways in which you can write HTML with the help of Emmet. So then we're going to have 2 columns. I'm just going to call it class of left and then a class of right. Very simple. Now inside, for our left column, we have the quote and then we have the author. We could just put paragraph quote and then paragraph author, but I'm actually going to put another parent container called inner. And this is just going to help us kind of like position it within the left column, these 2 elements, because we're going to position them in the center essentially, vertically. So we have an inner, and we're going to have a paragraph of class quote. And then that quote here is, I'm going to go ahead and paste this. Copy and paste it right there. To become a great designer, you need more than talent alone. You need a bit more, blah, blah, blah. I will just go ahead underneath this. Another paragraph of, I'm going to call this auth for the author, Gary Simon. All right, that part is very simple. Now for div class of right, we're going to have quite a bit more markup just because we have more things happening that has to be shown and hidden. All right, so this is going to have an inner class as well. And then inside of here, we're going to have the mask. All right, so the mask, if you recall from the previous video where I introduced this challenge, it's a mask is a parent container with the CSS property of overflow hidden so that we can use translate transform X like -100% to push it off to the left or 100% to push it off all the way to the right. So we're going to put mask right here. And we're going to have 2 different masks because we want a mask for the button and then also a mask for that little unordered list. So I'm going to have mask 1. And this is, again, in Emmet abbreviations, we can chain these little periods right here and hit enter. And then it creates this markup for us. Mask 1 is just going to allow us to choose this mask specifically, as we're going to have a rule set specifically for it. So outside of that, we're going to have our button. So this is going to be the button right here that we're going to create. Now, if you look at the button, it itself is a 2-column layout because we have this element in one column and then we have this button in another column. All right, so with that said, the parent container can simply just be a link so that both things are clickable, the actual type and the little circle as well. So we're going to say A, hit enter. It's not going anywhere right now, so we're just going to put a hashtag there. And then we need 2 elements. So we can use a span element to house the type. So discover what's extra. And then this is where we copy and paste the SVG. Again, just to do that, all we have to do is go over here, take both of those, right click, copy as SVG. We're going to paste it in. Let's get this styled up a little bit better. We don't need a width and height. We're going to give it a width and height in CSS. And here's our circle and here's our path. This is all looking good. We don't need this right there. And there we go. All right. Now we have our first mask right here and we need to have a second mask underneath it for the unordered list. So we're going to say mask. And then the unordered list is simply UL. And then we have our individual LI elements inside, of which there are 5. So dedication is 1. There's a few others. I'm going to go ahead and just paste in the rest off screen. So consistency, perseverance, grit. And then we're doing LI here at the last one. Class is back. And again, you don't necessarily have to add this class of back to it. You could use a pseudo element, but the reason we're adding a class of back is because in JavaScript, we're going to target this element and make it clickable to revert back to the original state. So that's all we have to do for our HTML. Now, of course, if we were to take our Sass, and by the way, I already have this single rule set, which gives us the background and the font family. The font's being imported at the top here already in this document. Make sure we're watching that, and we right-click Open with Live Server. This is what our project looks like. Usually when you have SVGs and you remove the width and height attributes as we did, they just get massive. They fill out their container. So obviously we have some work to do. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and conclude this just to keep these videos separate. This is the HTML portion. In the next lesson, we're going to focus on getting the CSS ready and then finally the JavaScript. All right, so here's our very first rule set in CSS, or Sass rather, and we're just defining the background, color, font family, all that good stuff. And again, just to rehash this is what the layout currently looks like. So reverting back to our HTML, we have a div class of container with two elements directly inside of it, which is going to be div class of left and div class of right. So we could use Flexbox, of course, for this on the container element. So we're going to put display flex. We're do justify content center to get it centered up, and then also a height of 100 viewport height to make sure it spans. So now we have, what is essentially two columns. We have our quote column, and then we have this column over here. After that, we're going to take also inside the left and the right elements here. So left, and we're just going to chain these together in this rule set for the selectors, and we're going to say display grid align content center. So align content works on the vertical axis, and then it will align it center based on the height of the parent container. We're also going to go ahead and put flex 1 because these are also Flexbox children because the container is display flex, and flex 1 will make sure that they're of equal width essentially. So if we save this, there we go. They're going to take up equal space between them. I know it looks horrible, but that's the process. So we're also going to put some padding around it. So 0 on the top and bottom, but 8 viewport widths on the right and left. And that'll give us some nice white space all around, as you can see here. All right, so after that, we're going to do that little line in the middle. Now, because we gave these elements left and right a flex of 1, we know that the very right edge of the left element is going to be 50% in the middle. That's where we're going to put a single 1 pixel border that will go straight down the right side. So to do that, we're going to say left border. We want it to be on the right, and that'll be give us right in the middle of the viewport. 1 pixel solid, RGBA. This is the color function, and we can pass in 255, 255, 255 because it's going to be white, but only at 10% opacity, or 0.1. So now if we save that, we have this line that goes straight down the middle of the viewport. Great. So after that, we're going to go ahead and style up the left column type where it has the quote and all that good stuff. So this right here will take just a little bit of rule sets here. So the first one's going to be a paragraph of quote and also an unordered list. Font size will be 2.2 viewport width. Font weight will be 300. Using viewport width, typically you'd want to use something like clamp function on this, but for this quick, desktop only version, this will work just fine. So making it a viewport width unit for the font size makes it fluid type, which is pretty nice. Okay, outside of that, we are also going to target our quote and the author. And we're going to say text align right because we want it to right align against this edge. That's basically how the design, how I designed it, and that's what we want to do as well. Also, we're going to take our author. Now, the author element right here, if we go back, we'll see we have this little dash right here. So we could just use like a dash on the keyboard, but to make it a little bit more dynamic and customizable, we're going to use a little trick here that is very common. I wouldn't call it a trick, I call it a pattern, something that's used very often. So let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. We're going to go ahead and take our paragraph auth, and first we're going to make the font weight bold. The font size is going to be 1.3 rem units. Position will be relative. Position relative is very important because it's acting as the parent element of a pseudo before or after selector. You're going to see what I mean in a second. We're also going to choose, we haven't used this in forever, but I use it still sometimes, float right which will keep it positioned to the right. Additionally, I'm going to say and before, and we're going to say content empty. Again, this is one of those, this is part of the pattern. First, we take the parent element and we say position relative. We put content empty, and then we put position absolute. That way we can say height 0. And again, this is for that little dash next to the author name. And we'll say width, we'll just hard code an absolute value of pixels at 20 pixels. And then a border bottom of 1 pixel solid, white. The top will be 50% because it's get this right here, this position absolute in a relative parent container makes our positioning of top left, bottom right in relation to the parent. You'll see what I mean. If I remove this, it's going to break the whole thing. So top 50, because we want it to be in the vertical center. And then left, we're just going to say negative 30 pixels. So if I save this, oh, well, I kind of styled it so that it's on the other side. No big deal. Typically, it would be on the other side anyways. And so there you go. We have this little dash that we used with this pseudo element. Now, like I said, notice where it's at right now, right here. Now, if I go ahead and I remove position relative from the parent, it disappears. I don't even know where it went. It probably is off the side over here because I put left negative 30. So if I put left maybe just positive 30, notice it's like way over here. It's not in relation to its parent container. That, my friends, is why you put position relative on the parent container when you're dealing with position absolute child elements. All right, so that right there is pretty good. And again, the reason I spent so much time talking about that is because it's a very common pattern, just like this mask pattern as well. All right, a lot of talking. Now, let's go ahead and take our masks, because that's the next element that falls inside of these. We have our container, we have left, we have right. Now we have our inner, which we'll deal with, but we also have our mask right here and here. So again, remember what I said, we just take mask and we simply say overflow hidden. Nothing's gonna happen at this point because we're not moving them outside of that parent container with transform just yet, but you'll see what I mean in a second. Now let's go ahead and switch gears, and we're gonna focus on the actual button right here. And that's wrapped in an A element right here, all right? So it has two child elements of a span and an SVG. So with that said, let's get back here. We're gonna go ahead and specify ACTA for our selector. The color is gonna be white. We're gonna have a display. Actually, I don't know why I did that because we don't need color white on that. We're gonna do a display flex because remember it has two of those elements that are in a left and right column. A gap between them of one M unit. And again, this is so big, I wanna go ahead and change the SVG size to 30 pixels. So because it's inside of the A element, we could just put SVG here nested inside of it and simply say width 30 pixels. And now it's gonna be a lot better. Wait, no, it's not. Let's make sure I'm gonna leave this in, by the way, so that you could watch me debug something, because I thought that was supposed to work. I mean, hey, this is the typical scenario of how things sometimes play out, even when recording courses and such. So we have our A CTA, which is that's why I never put a class. That's why it didn't work. There we go. Yep, so you want to check those things. Now you can see it's right here. Oh, the reason we made it white, by the way, is because default hyperlinks are blue. There we go. Let's save that. And there we go. Now we can see it much better. And what we want to do here at this point is put text decoration none. Transition is going to be transform, 0.4 seconds, cubic, Bezier. I forget which one of the presets it is, but I'm going to paste this one right here. And we're also going to align self flex end, which means it's going to position at the bottom of the container, which right now you can't really see it making a big effect, but you just wait, you'll see in a second here. We're also going to go ahead and take our span, which is wrapping around this type right here, and we're going to make the font size larger. So span is going to be font size 1.3 rem. And we're also going to say on hover, let's get down here, text decoration, underline. We're going to bring back that underline on hover. So now if we bring this back, there we go. Okay. Next up, we also want to do the hover fill, where we change the SVG colors here of the circle and the little arrow inside of it. So to do that, we just say and hover. And again, this is in relation to a CTA. So when the whole CTA element is being hovered, we want to change the circle in the selector here. And we want to change the fill to white, because right now it has no fill, it just has a stroke of white. And then also we'll copy this, paste it, and change the path. And again, this is in relation to circle here and path here. And we want to change the fill to the website background color, which happens to be 242C38. Now if we save this and we go back, there we go. We have exactly what we want. And that's also consistent with the Figma prototype. All right, so now we're almost getting finished with this. Now what we want to do, if we look back to our Figma document, the first screen has the unordered list here hidden. So that means we need to hide it. And remember, it has a mask, so we can hide it and just move it over. And the way we could do this is we target the UL. And with the UL element, we have to do some cleanup. So we get rid of default margin and padding, something I pretty much almost always do in terms of a pattern. List style type, to get rid of those little bullet points, we're going to say none. And then transform, translate X negative 100%. This part's important because guess what? It is hidden now. It went bye-bye. It actually exists if we look at the dev console. And we come over here, let's see here. Let me move things down just a bit. We could see that it exists. We have first class inner, this element, and then we also have this element. Okay, it is right there. You see that? That's because UL has transform translate X negative 100%. It is pushing it all the way off the view. We can't see it because mask, which is the parent container, has overflow hidden. If we untick that, guess what? We see it now. It looks terrible because it's overlapping, but we want to hide that. That's how that works. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to say right and inner. So we're selecting just the inner class that exists on the parent container right. And I'm going to say position relative. And then we're going to say mask 1, position absolute, and bottom 0. That's going to push that element right there. Okay. So now we click on it, nothing happens obviously, but we're basically at our starting point from our Figma document right here. It's pretty close. I think I have this at the bottom in line with the author, but yeah, same concept. All right, so we also have just a couple more. We have our unordered list. We're going to take our list items. We're going to do a margin bottom of 0.3 em just to create more vertical white space and separation between each of those list items. And then we're also going to take li back, which is the class that we gave it. And this is the differently styled last item of that list. So it looks like this right here. So we have to do that style for that list item specifically. And so we say color. That color code happens to be 677A98. Just kind of like a soft blue. Font size is 0.7 em rem units. And then cursor is going to be pointer. All right. So we can't see that because it doesn't yet exist. But of course, if we do really want to see it, just temporarily, we'll just delete that. We'll bring this mask. I would take an unordered list and get rid of that. And there we go. So this is kind of what we have. If I made that an M unit instead of rem unit, it would be larger as it's supposed to be. So if I take the rem off and we get our unordered list back, there we go. It's a little bit larger. Okay. Great. So that concludes all of the necessary CSS for this project. Now in the next video and the last video, we're going to work in that JavaScript. All right, so let's go ahead and get focused here on the JavaScript. So what we want to do is come out here and we want to first define some properties. And we know that looking at our prototype, this is clickable, like this whole button. So we're going to need to go ahead and get access to that. So we're going to say const CTA for call to action is going to be document.querySelector, and we're going to say .cta. Again, the class is up here, if I can find it, right there. So that is our class that we're getting access to. So if somebody clicks on this whole parent element, it's going to do something. Additionally, we're going to have another one of const details equals document.querySelector once again, unordered list. All right, so this is our details. I'm calling this details basically, this unordered list. And we need access to that in JavaScript so that we can attach a property, a style property of transition transform, or transform translate rather, so to move it into place when that is clicked. We're going to need one more called back, and this is going to be document query selector back, and that's in relation to this right here, this last one, because we're making this clickable just so we can kind of revert back to the original screen. Additionally, we're going to create a function. All right, so our function is going to be called detail panel. And we're creating a function out of this because it's going to be ran multiple times based on somebody clicking on the call to action, the button, versus the back button as well. It's going to be calling the same code. So it makes sense to wrap that in of a function. Now we're going to have a Boolean value. So that's going to say let's show details. And we're saying let this time because we're going to be reassigning it a new value essentially of either true or false. Initially, it's going to be false because the details of what it takes to be successful, the whole purpose of this whole section, are hidden. You have to click a button. So we're saying that's false. Then we're going to say inside if show details is false, and again, we do that with this little exclamation point, then do something inside of here. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we have to take our CTA and we have to do style transform equals translate x 110%. Now, at this point, if you're comparing your code and you've completed on your own, you're also watching me, you may have chosen to use classlist.add and you added a class that you then later defined in the CSS. That's perfectly fine. But the reason I chose style right here is because it was literally only one property with one value. So using style is actually more advantageous in this context, in my opinion. That way you don't have extra code in your CSS. That's just unnecessary. We can just write it right here. And then we're going to do the same thing to the details panel. Style transform is going to be 0, which means by default, if we look at our CSS and we look at our, let's find it here, if I could find it's somewhere. There it is. It's our unordered list is translate x negative 100%. So we're setting it back to 0 to get that list back into view. All right. And then finally, we want to take show details because we're showing them now and make it true. So let's just save this, and we're going to have to do an else as well. But for now, let's just save this and attach a event listener of click. And we're going to simply call detail panel, which is defined right here. So let's save it and let's click it. All right, so notice it kind of hid real quick. Nothing's going to happen when we click this because we haven't added an event listener on our back button. Save that. Oh no, it's not working. All right, so the reason it's not working is because we have to add an else right here. So if it is true, then what do we do here? Well, let's just copy these 3 lines. Oops, sorry. And we're going to say CTA style transform. This time we're going to bring it back into view to 0. This one will be negative 100%. Now, by the way, up here, you're probably wondering, why did I do 110%? That's because based on the Bezier spring that occurs, you can see a little bit of the edge kind of like off to the side. So I'm pushing it off further so that when that cubic Bezier style of animation makes it spring, you don't see it coming up for the edge. In fact, I can just show you. If I leave that at 100%, you can see it right there. Well, I'll zoom up real quick. Oh no, it's not working. And I can tell you why. This needs to be set to false. There we go. So now if I zoom up, you can kind of see it like kind of wobble back and forth off to the side. Now this is not instant because we don't have a transform or a transition property applied to it in CSS. So let's go ahead and remedy that real quick. So let's go back to our CSS and looking at my reference code real quick. Our CTA button, there we go. We have a transition, transform, but it's not the CTA, it's the UL. There we go. So we need to do transition, transform, 0.4 seconds, and then that cubic Bezier, we're going to use the same one. Right there. Now let's save it. There we go. Now to stop that little area right there, again, I'm going to make this 110%. Save it. There we go. All right. And that is it. So that is just one way of tackling this project. And hopefully you learned something with it. We're obviously going to ramp things up here because we're still dealing with the very basics of DOM manipulation and JavaScript. All right, let's continue on. Hello everybody, welcome to this brand new project, and this is going to be a cursor follow project. So it's basically we have a custom element of some sort that we styled, and we want it to follow the cursor. And this would be a great way to introduce the concept of objects in JavaScript. It's not something we touched yet, and it really makes sense to touch on it. And basically an object is just a collection of other variables. That's the easiest way to put it. It's kind of like an organizational thing. So can you get by without using objects with this type of work, like DOM manipulation and interactivity? Yes, you could, but when you start working with projects and certain features that are more complex, it makes sense to kind of group certain variables and functions and arrays together under a single variable known as an object. And it's just a collection of other elements, essentially. There's multiple ways to do a cursor follow sort of idea. We're going to do one way that it's quicker, but it's not quite as ideal. And then we're going to refactor it, which will then utilize classes. So if you open with Live Server and you view the project, this is what it's going to look like. It just has cursor real big in the middle, and then way up here we have this circle, this little circle. If we look at the HTML, we have a div ID of cursor, which is that orange circle, and then we have the H1 here. Now heading over the SAS rather, we can see we have the body element, we have the cursor. We're specifying position absolute, a width and height of 60 pixels, a border radius of 50%, which will make it a circle. We also have our background, which is just an orange color. Make it whatever you want. Pointer events none is very important because the intention is to have the cursor behind, our custom cursor behind our real cursor. And if you go to click on a link or something, it won't work if you don't put the pointer events none right there for that line. Mixed blend mode, darken. This I'm going to delete that transition for a second. We'll add it back later. This is just, it adds a cool effect when it interacts and that cursor element goes over other elements. We can kind of see like things behind it essentially. And then just the H1, and that's what we have. So let's get started. The first thing, if we want this cursor, this div element, the circle to follow the real mouse cursor, then we need access to this element right here, which is the cursor. So the first thing we specify is going to be const, and we're going to specify it called cursor. All right, now I hit tab by accident, but yeah, we're gonna, instead of doing query selector, we'll do get element by ID. All right, so we have access to it now, and we don't have to have the hash tag there. And then what we need to do is we need to add an event listener on mouse move. All right, so every time the mouse moves, then it's gonna fire this event. So document.add event listener, make sure you spell it right, mouse move. Right here where it says E, we can change this to whatever we want it. Typically, the pattern is just to say E. You don't have to though. All right, and that's short for event. All right, and so now what we're gonna do is say cursor dot style. Now I say we're gonna back up just a tad bit. Let's console log that, and I'll show you what it spits out as a part of this event. So if I save that and we go back, and I go and hit F12, you'll see all these mouse events that are firing every time it moves. And you'll see if we expand one of these and I zoom up, you'll see one called client X and client Y right here. So these are pixel values, like 1,186 pixels from like the left or so of the viewport. And client Y is on the Y axis. This is 432. So for that particular mouse event. Now these are firing like crazy. So all we have to do is do a transform on the little circle right here and change through the translate CSS property the X and Y values, and that physically will make it move around and follow the cursor. So to do that, all we have to say is cursor dot style, which means this gives us access to the CSS properties so that we can reassign values through JavaScript. So dot style dot transform, and this is going to equal, we're going to use backticks this time, which is the little key that is usually to the left of the number 1 on a keyboard. And inside of there, we're going to say, and the reason we're using backticks, by the way, is because it allows you to easily use what's called interpolation, where we can mention variables and also strings all within inside of these backticks. So we say translate, and then with the translate property in CSS works on an X and a Y value. So they're comma separated. The first value it has to be is a numerical value, and then we need an actual unit of pixels or percentages or whatever. So to get that value, remember it's client X, e.client X, and e.client Y. And if you think about it, this is kind of like an object itself where it says e.client X. It's a collection of other variables essentially. And so we'll get more into that later. So we're going to put e.client X, px, because otherwise it won't know what to do and won't work. So you have to give it a CSS unit. And then the same thing here on the Y. So e.client Y, px, just like that. So let's save that. And let's go back to our browser. And look at that. So if I zoom up, you'll see we have that mixed blend mode occurring here, which is pretty cool. And it works, but a couple things are wrong with it. First, the cursor is not in the center of it. That would be ideal. And then second, typically when you see this sort of thing, it's not like instantly falling. There's a lag usually. And you could try to do that with CSS transition delays and such, but the best way to do it is the more performant way, which is through what's called request animation frame. And so we're going to do that in our refactor, and in doing so, because we have to have access to multiple variables and different types of data, we're going to create our very first object. Okay, so let's go ahead and refactor this code. Now, what I want to do first is create our very first object. And how do you do that? Well, what we do is we're going to say let settings, So this is going to be a collection of different properties and variables essentially. And the way you declare an object is to open it up with the squiggly braces as shown. All right, so as you can see, it's already given some suggestions. We don't need those. But we want to store a few things so that we can then access them and update them, which is very important right here that we use let so that we can change the data essentially. So otherwise, if you didn't want to, you could just use const as well. And so what we're going to type here is mouse x is 0. We're going to update these things though, so don't worry about that. The mouse y is going to be 0. And then we're going to have an x position of 0 and a y position of 0. And this right here is specifically in relation to the div ID of cursor itself, the little orange circle, because the mouse X and mouse Y values aren't going to be the same because we have to apply an offset in order to get that little circle in the middle of the cursor. Before it wasn't, it was kind of off to the lower right. And then finally, we're going to add a speed property, and we're just going to set this to 15. This speed property will dictate and allow us to update it kind of as configuration setting, like how slow it takes for the cursor to catch up with the mouse, because we want a little bit of a lag. Okay, and that's our very first object. Now, objects can also allow you to create functions inside them. You can store functions inside them as well. You can store arrays. So if you wanted like a random array here, you can just create arrays just like that. Like I said, very powerful. It's just a collection of other stuff that already exists essentially in JavaScript. Okay, so now that we have that, we also are going to use the web animations API, and that requires kind of learning a new sort of paradigm, and that is performant animation with request animation frame. I know that sounds like crazy talk and it sounds very complex, but don't worry, it's not. I'll walk you through it. So in order to do this, we're going to create a function called animate. All right, so function animate, and inside of here we're going to put request animation frame animate. All right. So what this is doing is this is a function here that is going to call our own function right here that's inside of it. So every time this is ran, which is typically 60 times per second, 60 frames per second, it's going to call whatever, it's going to execute whatever is inside of this code here. Hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of like a paradox of some sort, a function calling itself all the time. That's essentially what's happening. And then we also want to call it when the page loads as well to essentially start the function. Otherwise, if you don't call it outside of itself, then it's never going to run. It's just a function that has not been executed yet. So we run it as well, and we call it here, and we call it inside of here. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so over here we had this mouse move over here. We still want a mouse move, and we're going to place it here near the bottom. And what we're going to do is we're going to update the mouse X and mouse Y variables within our settings object every time the mouse moves. So to do that, we just simply say, let me zoom up here, settings.mouseX equals e.pageX. You can do pageX as well, and then page Y. All right, and then this becomes Y as well. All right, so this is very cool. So everything's kind of tied together with just these few lines. So the very first thing that we have is we're defining up here an object. All right, it has mouse X, mouse Y, and all these other ones. Then we're also right here, every time the mouse moves, we're updating these two values of mouse X and mouse Y with the e.pageX and page Y. And then also at the same time, when it loads, we're calling animate, and which starts running the animate function. And then this line right here, we'll keep calling it 60 frames per second. Now, that in and of itself won't do anything because it's empty outside of just request animation frame. We need it to do something. So the best way to demonstrate this without getting too deep is just to console log something. So in this case, if we console log our settings object and call specifically mouse X, for instance, we should see that updating all the time. So let's just do that. Console log, and we'll do settings.mouse X. We can also do settings.mouse Y as well if we comma separate it. So now if we go back, we'll see those two values right here. Now, of course, it's not moving a cursor because we haven't tied that information to the cursor yet. And that's what we're going to do now. So inside of here, what we're going to do is we're going to say cursor.style.transform, just like we did before, equals, and we're going to say translate. And GitHub Copilot is pretty smart, so it knows what we want to do. We just want to get the settings, not the X position. For now, we're just going to do the mouse X and mouse Y. So mouse X, mouse Y. Let's save it. All right. So this is exactly where we were before, except we did it in a more complex way. So the payoff doesn't really make sense at this time because we actually have more code to get the same exact result. But that's not the end game here. We want to fix a couple things. The first thing we want to fix is we want to get this circular element so that the very tip of that cursor that I'm moving around is in the center of the element. And there's multiple ways to go about this. Some ways are better than others. So the best way to do it is, one way to do it would be, okay, we already know the size of 60 for the width and height of 60 pixels for width and height, but so we could hard code that. But there's a better way to do it dynamically where we can tell JavaScript to get the size of the element for us. That way, if we go to change the size of this right here in the future, we don't have to do anything. It's going to get the size itself. And so we haven't done this sort of thing yet, but it's actually really easy. And so we're going to call a method, and that method is called offset width and offset height. So here's how that works. We're going to say right here, let cursor width equals cursor.offset width. Now again, cursor is already defined up here, and when you use get element by ID or a query selector, it provides you with offset width. That basically tells you it's the width of this particular element. All right, we're going to replicate that. So Shift-Alt down, and this is going to be cursor height. And of course, offset width changes to offset height. Great. So now that we have those two, nothing's changed. We're just storing and declaring those in a variable. But what we want to do now is we want to update the X position and the Y position now that it's not tied explicitly to the settings mouse X and mouse Y. So the way we do that is we're going to say settings.xpos. And this is the real interesting part. We're going to use right here the plus equal operator. This is going to add a numerical value to itself. And the reason this will work is because request animation frame is continually calling itself. And this is where that speed element will also come into play, because we're going to use a little bit of math to make it lag based on the speed and direction of the cursor. So plus equals, we're going to open up into parentheses, settings.mousex minus settings.xposition. And then we're going to divide that by settings.speed. I know it's a little bit complex here, but hang with me. And the point at which this cursor width and cursor height comes in, it actually comes into play in this line right here. And you'll see that in a second. So this right here, the X position and XY, is for the speed element. So we're going to replicate that line and change this to Y position. So again, we're just updating the X and Y position in this object in the animate function. And we're doing this 60 times per second. So now all we have to do, now all we have to do is put Y position here, or mouse Y, and then settings dot Y, and we keep setting speed. So if we look at this here in the browser, we will see that nothing appears to change, and that is simply because in our transform, we're not taking into account the new X position and Y position. We're just explicitly tying it to the mouse X and mouse Y still. So we're just going to modify that and then also work in our cursor width and cursor height to get that repositioned to the center. So here's what this is going to look like. And once we understand how the X works, it's just a matter of changing how the Y works as well. It's the same exact concept. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this mouse X and we're going to change this to X position. And then we're going to subtract the cursor width, and we're going to divide the cursor width by 2 so that we can find the middle of it. All right, then we're going to take the same concept. We're just going to take everything from here to here, from there to there. This changed to Y. This is changed to height. And it's still divided by 2. So this is what it all looks like right here. So now that we're using X position and Y position instead of settings.mouseX and mouse Y, we should see a lag here, and it's going to look very smooth and very cool. Oh no. I have an issue. Oh yes, I forgot to put the unit at the end. Make sure you put pixel at the end there for the height. Go back, and here we go. So notice how it's just nice and smooth, and it kind of just has a lag. We can change how slow or how fast by simply updating the property in the speed property in the object. So if we change this to like 40 or so, it's going to go a lot slower. It's going to take forever for it to catch up. Whereas if we change this to like 8, you'll see it's much quicker, and that way it gives us a nice way to control and allow anybody else to easily modify the settings object right here to control the speed. So hopefully you understand now that the utility of working with objects, and again, it's primarily for an organizational concept when you're working with bigger projects, more complex elements. You can store everything in a central location and then access it. And so a lot of what we've been working with already operates on this object paradigm. For instance, document is an object that has a bunch of other elements like functions that we can call. And so this is how we create those ourselves right here. All right, everybody, hopefully you enjoyed that course. And if you did, hopefully you created an account over at DesignCourse.com. And then that way you're going to get an email very shortly within the next 2 weeks that will give you an opportunity to take Advanced Frontends while it's being developed during a 1-week early access period. And you're also going to get it for a reduced price. So as always, make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet. And I'll see you all real soon. Goodbye.